The emergency beacon cut through the void like a scream in the night. Every civilized world in the galaxy received it simultaneously, the quantum-entangled signal carrying a message that would change everything. Admiral Chun Wei stood on the bridge of the UES Determination, watching as her communications officer's face went pale. "Admiral, you need to hear this," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, his voice barely steady. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a being that looked like it had crawled out of humanity's oldest nightmares. The creature had multiple writhing tentacles where a face should be, and its voice carried the sound of metal scraping against bone. "Citizens of the galaxy," the transmission began. "I am Harold Vexen of the Void Collective. Your pathetic civilizations have 30 standard cycles to surrender unconditionally, or we will consume every living thing in this galaxy. We have already destroyed 12 galactic clusters. Your resistance is meaningless." The transmission cut to footage that made even hardened naval officers turn away. Entire star systems being drained of life, their planets turned to lifeless husks. Billions of beings fleeing in terror as massive dark ships blotted out their suns. However, the herald continued, its voice dripping with mock generosity. "The Galactic Council may summon champions to face our trials of worth. Should these champions succeed in all 5 trials, we will withdraw and seek easier prey. You have 7 cycles to present your champions at the coordinates we will provide." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Within hours, representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy gathered in emergency session. The proud Altarians, masters of energy manipulation, sat beside the crystalline Vexhai, whose minds could process 1,000,000 calculations per second. The insectoid KRYLL buzzed nervously while the ethereal luminari floated in their containment fields. High Chancellor Zonthor of the Galactic Council called the session to order. His scaled features were grim as he addressed the assembly. "The situation is clear," he began. "The Void Collective has given us a choice between total surrender and trials that we know nothing about. We must select champions for these trials." The Altarian representative, General Kethvar, stood first. His golden armor caught the chamber's lights as he spoke. "Our energy warriors have conquered solar storms and tamed black holes. We volunteer our finest." "Energy manipulation will not suffice," interrupted Dr. Zixhai, the crystalline being's voice ringing like wind chimes. "The trials will require intellectual superiority. My people's computational abilities far exceed any other species." The KRYLL ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly. "Strength and speed will be needed. Our warrior drones can react in nanoseconds and lift starship hulls." One by one, each species made their case, boasting of their unique abilities and evolutionary advantages. The Luminari spoke of their mastery over light itself. The Saurian Collective demonstrated their perfect battle coordination. The Cephaloid Consortium showed recordings of their shape-shifting abilities. Through it all, Ambassador Sarah Chun sat quietly in the human delegation's corner. She was a small woman by human standards, unremarkable in appearance compared to the exotic aliens around her. Her simple blue uniform looked plain next to the elaborate dress of the other representatives. "What about the humans?" Chancellor Zonthor finally asked, almost as an afterthought. The chamber fell silent. Several species exchanged glances that clearly said, "Why would we consider them?" The humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. They had no natural energy manipulation abilities. Their minds processed information at a fraction of the speed of advanced AI, and their physical capabilities were average at best. Ambassador Chen stood slowly. "We volunteer," she said simply. The reaction was immediate. General Kethvar's laughter boomed across the chamber. "Humans? You cannot manipulate energy. You cannot compute at superhuman speeds. You lack natural armor or weapons. What exactly would you contribute? Your species is barely 300 years past chemical propulsion," added Dr. Zixhai. "What could you possibly offer that we cannot provide in superior measure?" The KRYLL ambassador's translator crackled with amusement. "No offense to the humans, but this is not a matter for amateurs. The fate of the galaxy is at stake." Sarah Chun waited for the laughter to die down. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. You're right about our limitations. We can't throw lightning bolts or calculate hyperspace coordinates in our heads. We can't change shape or move faster than sound. She paused, looking around the chamber at all the superior beings surrounding her. But we've never surrendered to anything that tried to destroy us. Not ice ages, not plagues, not wars that consumed our whole planet. We don't know how to quit. Admirable, Chancellor Zonthor said diplomatically. But surely you understand that bravery alone will not suffice against cosmic horrors that have destroyed 12 galactic clusters. Maybe not, Sarah agreed. But every other species here is talking about what they can do. We're offering to do whatever needs to be done. The chamber erupted in debate. The advanced civilizations argued amongst themselves about which combination of their abilities would be most effective. Some suggested sending teams of specialists from multiple species. Others insisted that their particular evolutionary advantages made them the obvious choice. As the arguments raged, Sarah Chun activated her personal communicator and sent a message to Admiral Chen Wei aboard the Determination. Her message was brief. Begin assembling a volunteer team. All human military branches. Tell them it's probably a suicide mission. The response came back within minutes. Already have 10,000 volunteers. Had to cut it down to manageable numbers. Hours passed as the Galactic Council debated. Each species presented detailed analyses of the potential trials, complex strategies based on their understanding of cosmic-level threats, and sophisticated arguments about why their abilities were essential. Finally, Chancellor Zonthor called for a vote. We must choose our champions. The Void Collective will not wait for us to reach consensus through endless debate. The vote was close, but, in the end, a coalition of the most advanced species was selected. The Altarians would handle any energy-based challenges. The Vexhi would tackle intellectual puzzles. The KRYLL would provide brute force. The Luminari would manipulate light and radiation. The Saurians would coordinate group tactics. And the humans? Sarachan asked. Will serve in a support capacity. Chancellor Zonthor replied diplomatically. Your species' contributions to logistics and basic maintenance will surely be valuable. As the session ended and the various delegations dispersed to prepare their champions, Sarachun made another call to Admiral Wei. How did the selection go? The Admiral asked. About as expected, Sarah replied. We're designated as support personnel. I see. And what are your orders, Ambassador? Sarachun looked out at the stars through the council chamber's viewing port. Somewhere out there, an enemy that had destroyed 12 galactic clusters was waiting to test whoever the galaxy sent against them. Prepare the team anyway, she said. All of them. Something tells me the galaxy is going to need us to do more than carry equipment. 3 days later, the assembled champions gathered at the coordinates provided by the Void Collective. The sight that greeted them would haunt their dreams forever. A massive structure hung in space, clearly artificial, but unlike anything in any species' databases. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, like a crystal cathedral designed by something that had never experienced compassion. The champion teams from each species arrived in their finest vessels, equipped with their most advanced technology. The human contingent arrived in a converted cargo ship, their equipment looking primitive compared to the exotic technologies surrounding them. As they prepared to board the structure where the trials would take place, Harold Vexthen's voice echoed across all frequencies. Welcome, Galaxy Dwellers, to your final examination. 5 trials await you. Each will test different aspects of what you call survival. Most of you will not survive the first trial. None of you will survive all 5. The herald's laughter sounded like dying stars. But, please, do provide entertainment in your failure. The human team stood at the back of the gathered champions, unremarkable among the exotic aliens preparing for trials they couldn't imagine. None of the advanced species paid them any attention as they checked their energy weapons, calibrated their computational matrices, and activated their enhancement systems. Captain Maria Santos, leading the human team, looked at her squad of 20 volunteers. They carried basic plasma rifles, standard armor, and equipment that any space marine would recognize. Nothing fancy, nothing that would impress the galactic audience watching from orbit. Remember, she told her team quietly, everyone else here thinks they know what these trials will test. Energy, intelligence, strength, speed, coordination. They've optimized for what they think they need to succeed. She looked toward the alien structure waiting for them. We don't know what we need to succeed, so we're going to be ready for anything. As the champions began boarding the structure, the humans fell in at the back of the procession, unnoticed and underestimated. Behind them, in the watching fleets, billions of beings across the galaxy held their breath and prayed to their various gods that their champions would be enough. None of them were praying for the humans. After all, everyone knew what humans were good for, and it wasn't facing cosmic horrors and trials designed by entities that consumed galaxies. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The interior of the Void Collective's structure defied every law of physics the galaxy's finest minds understood. Corridors stretched in impossible directions, gravity shifted without warning, and the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. The assembled champions moved through halls that looked like they were carved from crystallized screams. Captain Maria Santos watched the other teams spread out, each group confident in their specialized abilities. The Altarian Energy Warriors' armor glowed with stored power, ready to unleash forces that could crack planets. The Vex-High computational specialists had their minds linked to quantum processing arrays that hummed with calculation. The KRYLL warrior drones moved in perfect formation, their carapaces gleaming like living weapons. First trial begins now. Harold Vexthen's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. You will face the maze of infinite sorrow. Each team must reach the center, where a key awaits. Only those who claim a key may proceed to the second trial. The floor beneath them disappeared. The teams plummeted through darkness before landing on separate platforms scattered throughout a vast labyrinth. Each group found themselves isolated, facing walls that stretched impossibly high and passages that seemed to shift when observed directly. The Altarians immediately began blasting through walls with concentrated energy beams. Their leader, Champion Kethvar, directed his warriors to carve a straight path toward the center they had calculated using their ship's sensors. Inefficient, observed Vex-High Prime Computus as her crystalline form began glowing with processing power. The maze's structure follows a mathematical pattern. I will calculate the optimal route. The KRYLL needed no discussion. Their warrior drones spread out in a search pattern, using their enhanced speed to map the maze through brute force exploration. Their chittering communications filled the air as they shared navigational data. The human team landed hard on their platform, several members grunting as they hit the strange metal floor. Captain Santos quickly assessed their situation while her team spread into defensive positions. Analysis? She asked Sergeant Kim Wu, her engineer. The walls are some kind of metamaterial, Wu reported, running her scanner along the surface. Dense as neutronium, but somehow flexible. Energy weapons aren't going to cut through this easily. And the structure? Santos asked Corporal Davies, their navigation specialist. The geometry doesn't make sense, Captain. My instruments are reading passages that circle back on themselves, stairs that go up, but somehow end up below where they started. Santos nodded. Non-Euclidean architecture. Ancient human writers theorized about this kind of thing. She keyed her comm unit. All teams, stay in contact. Watch each other's backs. Something about this place feels wrong. The other teams had already moved out, each pursuing their specialized approach. The humans were left alone on their platform, looking remarkably mundane compared to the exotic champions who had dispersed into the maze. Orders, Captain? Asked Private First Class Jackson, the youngest member of their team. Santos looked around at her people. They were just humans. No energy manipulation, no superhuman processing power, no natural weapons or armor. Just 20 humans with standard equipment and whatever was inside their heads and hearts. We're going to do what humans do best, she said. We're going to adapt. The next several hours revealed the true nature of the maze of infinite sorrow. The Altarians discovered that their energy blasts, while capable of damaging the walls, caused the maze to actively reconfigure itself around them. Each hole they blasted would heal within minutes, and new walls would spring up behind them, cutting off their retreat. Champion Kethvar's frustration grew as his team's power reserves drained. The maze is feeding on our energy output, he reported to the others. The more power we use, the more it adapts to counter us. The Vex-High faced a different problem. Prime Computus had indeed found the mathematical pattern governing the maze's structure, but the pattern itself was changing. Every time her calculations approached a solution, the underlying rules would shift slightly, forcing her to begin her analysis anew. "Impossible," she transmitted. "The maze's algorithm is evolving faster than I can process it. It is learning from my computational methods." The KRYLL warrior drones had mapped most of their section of the maze, but their efficiency worked against them. The passages they had explored began spawning false paths, identical in every detail to the real ones, but leading to dead ends or circular loops. Their perfect coordination became a liability as they followed each other into elaborate traps. The humans, meanwhile, had taken a different approach entirely. Sergeant Wu had stopped trying to scan the walls and instead was listening to them. "Captain, I'm picking up vibrations. The walls are responding to something, but it's not just our actions." Private Rodriguez, who had been quiet since they landed, suddenly spoke up. "My grandmother always said that if you're lost in the woods, you sit still and listen. The forest will tell you which way to go." "This isn't a forest, Rodriguez," muttered Corporal Davies. "No," Captain Santos said slowly. "But maybe the same principle applies. We're thinking about this like a puzzle to be solved. What if it's something else?" She ordered her team to stop moving and just observe. For 30 minutes, they sat in complete silence, watching and listening. Slowly, patterns began to emerge that had nothing to do with mathematics or energy signatures. "The walls breathe," observed Specialist Chun. "Look at the way the light changes. It's like the whole maze is alive." "And it's in pain," added Private Jackson quietly. "Listen to the sound it makes when other teams use their weapons. It's not just reconfiguring. It's hurting." Captain Santos felt something click into place. The maze of infinite sorrow. Not a puzzle or a test of abilities, but something else entirely. "Wu, what do you know about trauma responses in living systems?" "Well," the engineer said slowly, "traumatized organisms often create defensive barriers. They adapt to protect themselves from further harm. And the more you try to force your way through those barriers, the stronger they become." Wu's eyes widened. "Captain, you think the maze is alive?" "I think the maze is in pain," Santos replied. "And I think it's been tortured by thousands of years of beings trying to force their way through it." She stood up and approached the nearest wall. Instead of scanning it or trying to cut through it, she placed her hand flat against its surface. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. The effect was immediate. The wall's pulsing shifted, becoming less agitated. Other team members placed their hands on different sections, offering the same simple acknowledgement of the maze's suffering. The walls began to change, but not in the defensive way they had responded to the other teams. Passages opened gently, revealing a path that led deeper into the maze. The humans followed, not as conquerors or analyzers, but as visitors who understood they were guests in a living thing's home. Meanwhile, the other teams were discovering that their specialized approaches were failing catastrophically. The Altarians were trapped in an ever-shrinking energy maze of their own making. The Vexhi had fallen into computational loops that consumed all their processing power. The KRYLL were scattered across false passages that their own mapping had created. The humans reached the center of the maze first, finding a crystalline chamber where a simple key floated in the air. But as Captain Santos reached for it, she hesitated. "There are supposed to be keys for all the teams," she said. "The maze isn't evil. It's just hurt." She turned to address the maze itself, speaking to the walls around them. "We need your help. Our galaxy is dying, and we have to get through these trials to save it. But we don't want to hurt you anymore." The chamber filled with a sound like gentle sobbing, and then, one by one, other passages opened. Keys materialized for each team, but the paths leading to them were safe and clear. The maze was choosing to help, not because it was forced to, but because someone had finally shown it kindness. The other teams reached the center within the hour, finding their keys waiting for them. They were confused but grateful, assuming their specialized efforts had finally overcome the maze's defenses. Harold Vexthen's voice echoed through the chamber as all the teams assembled. "Curious. The maze has not shown such compliance in millennia. No matter. You have all passed the first trial, though the human approach was unexpected." As the teams prepared for transport to the second trial, the alien champions finally began paying attention to the humans. General Kethvar approached Captain Santos, his expression puzzled. How did your team reach the center first? My sensors detected no energy discharges, no computational arrays, no enhanced movement. We listened, Santos replied simply. Listen to what? Santos looked back at the maze as they left, watching the walls pulse gently now instead of with the agitated rhythm they had shown before. To something that was in pain. The Vex-High Prime Computus floated closer, her crystalline form rotating as she processed this information. You anthropomorphized the maze structure. That is highly illogical. Maybe, Santos agreed. But it worked. As they were transported to the location of the second trial, the various team leaders began quietly discussing what they had witnessed. The humans had succeeded not through superior technology or evolved abilities, but through something the galactic civilizations had dismissed as primitive, empathy. Second trial will commence shortly, Harold Vex then announced. You will face the Garden of Despair, where hope itself is poison and despair is the only truth. Those who succumb to hope will be consumed. Those who embrace despair will be destroyed. Find the path between. The teams materialized in a vast garden that stretched to the horizon, filled with the most beautiful flowers any of them had ever seen. The air was sweet with perfume, and gentle music played from hidden sources. It was paradise, perfect and welcoming. Trap, muttered Sergeant Wu immediately. Obviously, agreed Captain Santos. The question is what kind. The other teams were already spreading out, each applying their particular expertise. The Altarians began scanning for energy traps hidden among the flowers. The Vex-High started analyzing the garden structure for logical inconsistencies. The KRYLL deployed in defensive formations, ready for physical threats. The humans stood still and observed. It's too perfect, Corporal Davies noted. Everything here is designed to make us feel safe and hopeful. But, the Herald said hope is poison here, Private Jackson added. So the more we like this place, the more danger we're in. And, if we despair because we know it's a trap, Specialist Chun continued the thought, we get destroyed anyway. Captain Santos nodded. So we need to find a state of mind that's neither hopeful nor despairing. Acceptance, said Private Rodriguez quietly. My grandfather fought in the water wars back on Earth. He said the key to survival wasn't hoping you'd make it through or despairing that you wouldn't. It was accepting that whatever happened, you'd deal with it. As if responding to their conversation, the garden began to shift. The other teams, who had been attracted to the most beautiful sections, suddenly found themselves sinking into flowers that revealed themselves as carnivorous plants. The beauty they had hoped to enjoy was literally consuming them. But their despair at this betrayal triggered a different response. Thorns erupted from the ground, reaching for those who had fallen into hopelessness about their situation. The humans began walking through the garden with careful, measured steps, neither drawn to its beauty nor repelled by its dangers. They acknowledged each flower as they passed, noting its beauty but also its potential threat, feeling neither hope that they were safe nor despair that they were doomed. It's actually kind of beautiful, Private Jackson said as they navigated between a rose that sang lullabies and a lily that whispered promises of eternal happiness. I mean, it's trying to kill us, but the craftsmanship is incredible. The entity that made this put a lot of work into it, Sergeant Wu agreed, carefully stepping around a patch of grass that was clearly designed to induce euphoria. Even if it is a death trap, you have to respect the artistry. They reached the center of the garden, where a simple door stood among the most gorgeous flowers any of them had ever seen. The other teams were still struggling with the garden's psychological attacks, caught between hope and despair. But Captain Santos didn't open the door yet. Instead, she turned back toward the other teams, all of whom were trapped in various stages of the garden's influence. We need to help them, she told her team. How? Asked Corporal Davies. If we try to save them, we'll start hoping we can succeed, and that will trigger the garden's defenses against us. Santos considered this. Then, we don't hope to save them. We just do what needs to be done, whether it works or not. The human team spread out through the garden, moving with the same careful acceptance they had maintained for themselves. When they reached the trapped alien teams, they didn't offer reassurance or express optimism. They simply began the practical work of extraction. Stand still, Sergeant Wu told General Kethvar as his team fought against carnivorous vines that fed on their struggles. Don't fight it, don't give up. Just be present with what's happening. It took time and patience, but one by one, the human team guided their alien colleagues to the same state of mind they had found. Not hope, not despair, but simple acceptance of reality as it was. When all the teams had reached the garden's center, Harold Vexton's voice carried a note of surprise. All teams have passed the second trial. This has not occurred in over 2,000 years. As they passed through the door to the third trial, the alien champions began looking at the humans with something approaching respect. Prime Computus floated beside Captain Santos as they walked. Your species appears to possess an unusual psychological resilience, the Vexhai observed. How do you maintain equilibrium between hope and despair? Practice, Santos replied. Humans have been dealing with impossible situations for our entire history. We've learned that the best way to handle them is to just keep going, whether things look good or bad. Fascinating, the crystalline being mused. We have attempted to optimize our emotional responses for maximum efficiency. You have apparently evolved to maintain function regardless of emotional state. General Kethvar overheard their conversation. His energy armor was dimmed now, conserving power after the garden's attacks. Your team saved us back there. Why? You could have proceeded alone and increased your own chances of survival. Captain Santos glanced back at him. Because that's what you do when people are in trouble. You help them, even when helping them might doom your own mission. Especially then. The alien champions exchanged looks. They were beginning to understand that the humans operated by rules their advanced civilizations had never considered. Not optimization, not efficiency, not even survival of the fittest, but something more complex and perhaps more powerful. As they approached the third trial, Harold Vexton's voice carried a note they hadn't heard before. Something that might have been uncertainty. The third trial awaits. You will face the arena of perfect logic, where emotion is weakness and pure reason is the only path to victory. Choose your champion. The assembled teams looked at each other. This was clearly designed for the Vexhai computational specialists. Their crystalline forms could process logical problems far beyond any other species' capabilities. But, after watching what had happened in the first two trials, none of the alien teams were quite as confident in their specialized approaches as they had been before. And the humans, who had no business succeeding at trials designed for beings far beyond their capabilities, simply prepared to do whatever came next. The arena of perfect logic materialized around them like a mathematical nightmare. Pure geometric shapes floated in impossible formations while equations the size of starships drifted through the air, their variables shifting in complex patterns that hurt to observe directly. The very space seemed to be constructed from crystallized thought. Each team must select one champion, Harold Vexton announced, its voice now carrying an edge of anticipation. They will face the logic engine, an artificial intelligence that has consumed the combined knowledge of 1,000 extinct civilizations. Defeat it through pure logical discourse, and you proceed. Allow emotion or irrationality to taint your arguments, and you will be disintegrated. The choice seemed obvious to everyone present. The Vexhai lived and breathed pure logic, their crystalline minds processing information at quantum speeds. Prime Computus stepped forward immediately, her form glowing with confidence. I will represent all teams, she announced. My computational capabilities exceed the combined processing power of every other being present by several orders of magnitude. The other alien teams nodded in agreement. This trial was clearly designed for beings like the Vexhai. Even General Kethvar, still proud despite his energy warrior's struggles in the previous trials, acknowledged the wisdom of this choice. The Vexhai are our logical superiors, he admitted. Prime Computus is our best hope. All eyes turned to the human team, expecting their immediate agreement. Instead, Captain Santos was having a quiet conversation with her squad. After a moment, she stepped forward. We'd like to put forward our own champion, she said. The response was immediate, and unanimous laughter from the alien teams. Captain Santos, Prime Computus said with what passed for patience among her species. I process logical statements at 10 to the 15th calculations per second. My memory banks contain the complete mathematical proofs of 47 civilizations. What could any human possibly offer against such capabilities? Maybe nothing, Santos admitted. But I'd like to nominate Private First Class Jackson. Every being in the arena turned to look at the young human soldier. Jackson was perhaps 22 Earth years old, fresh-faced and nervous. Among the exotic aliens and seasoned veterans around him, he looked like a child who had wandered into a gathering of gods. General Kethvar's energy field flickered with disbelief. You would stake all our lives on an untested youth with no apparent qualifications. Jackson studied philosophy before he enlisted. Captain Santos replied calmly. Ancient Earth philosophy, back when humans still thought logic puzzles could solve everything. Philosophy. Prime Computus's crystalline form rotated rapidly, a sign of agitation among her species. Against computational logic? This is suicide. Jackson himself looked terrified. Captain, I don't think. You've been thinking, Santos interrupted. I've watched you in both trials. While everyone else was applying their specializations, you were asking different questions. She turned to address the other teams. In the maze, Jackson was the first to suggest the walls were alive. In the garden, he recognized that acceptance was the path between hope and despair. He doesn't think like a computer or an energy manipulator or a warrior. He thinks like a human. That is precisely the problem, Prime Computus replied. Human thought processes are inefficient, emotional, and prone to logical fallacies. Against a logic engine designed to exploit such weaknesses, they will be worse than useless. Maybe, Santos acknowledged. But every trial so far has been designed to defeat exactly the kinds of thinking you're all good at. What if this one's the same? The alien teams erupted in debate. The idea that raw computational power might not be the answer to a logic trial seemed impossible. Yet the humans had succeeded in situations where superior abilities had failed. Finally, General Kethvar called for order. We are wasting time. If the humans insist on sending their champion to certain death, let them. Prime Computus will be ready to take over when their soldier fails. Jackson walked toward the center of the arena on shaking legs. As he moved, geometric shapes began arranging themselves into a complex pattern around him. The logic engine materialized as a perfect sphere of light, its voice resonating with the harmony of pure mathematics. Greetings, organic intellect, the engine said. I am the culmination of logical thought across 1,000 worlds. You appear to be a barely evolved primate with no computational enhancements. This will be concluded quickly. Jackson swallowed hard. Hello? I'm Jackson. Nice to meet you. The engine paused, as if processing something unexpected. You respond to a logical challenge with social pleasantries. Are you attempting to confuse me with irrationality? No, I'm just being polite, Jackson replied. My mom always said good manners are important, even in difficult situations. Prime Computus's form flickered with disbelief. The young human was committing exactly the kind of logical errors she had predicted, introducing emotional and social elements into what should be pure rational discourse. Very well, the logic engine continued. I will begin with a simple proof. The universe operates according to logical principles. Therefore, all truths can be derived through logical analysis. Do you accept this premise? Jackson considered for a moment. Well, that depends on what you mean by truth, doesn't it? Truth is that which corresponds to reality. Logic reveals reality. Therefore, logic reveals truth. But what if reality itself isn't logical? Jackson asked. I mean, back home we have things like quantum mechanics, where particles can be in two places at once until you observe them. That doesn't seem very logical to me. The logic engine's glow intensified. Quantum mechanics is perfectly logical within its mathematical framework. Your inability to comprehend it does not make it illogical. Oh, I'm not saying it's wrong, Jackson clarified. I'm saying maybe logic isn't the only way to understand truth. Maybe there are some things that are true even if they don't make sense logically. The alien teams watched in horror as Jackson continued to commit what seemed like basic logical errors. He was introducing concepts like emotion, intuition, and faith into a rational discourse. According to everything they understood, he should have been disintegrated by now. Instead, the logic engine seemed to be struggling with his responses. Give me an example of a truth that cannot be derived logically, the engine demanded. Jackson thought for a moment. Love, he said simply. Love is merely a chemical reaction designed to promote reproductive success. It can be understood through evolutionary biology and neurochemistry. Sure, you can explain the mechanics of it, Jackson agreed. But can you prove whether love is good or bad through logic alone? Good and bad are subjective value judgments without objective meaning. Exactly, Jackson said, and for the first time since the conversation began, he smiled. You can describe love, but you can't judge love. Logic can tell you how things work, but it can't tell you what things mean. The logic engine fell silent. Around the arena, equations began flickering and mathematical symbols started rearranging themselves chaotically. Furthermore, Jackson continued, gaining confidence. You said you've consumed the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations. But knowledge isn't the same as wisdom, is it? I mean, you know everything those civilizations discovered, but do you understand why any of it mattered to them? Mattering is another subjective concept without logical foundation. But the beings who created all that knowledge thought it mattered. They lived and died for ideas you can compute but not comprehend. So who really understands their civilizations better? You, with all their data, or someone who can imagine what it felt like to be them? The logic engine's form began fluctuating wildly. The geometric shapes around them started to dissolve and reform in increasingly unstable patterns. You are attempting to introduce logical paradoxes, it accused. No, I'm pointing out that logic has limits, Jackson replied gently. It's a tool, and, like any tool, it's great for some jobs and useless for others. You wouldn't use a hammer to perform surgery, right? That analogy is imperfect. All analogies are imperfect. That's what makes them useful. Perfect logic can only compare things that are identical, but identical things don't need to be compared. Analogies help us understand new things by relating them to familiar things, even though the relationship isn't exact. Prime Computus was processing frantically, trying to understand how Jackson's obviously flawed arguments were not only avoiding disintegration, but actually seeming to destabilize the logic engine itself. I don't understand, she transmitted to Captain Santos. His reasoning contains multiple logical fallacies. He's introducing emotion, subjectivity, and imperfect analogies. The engine should have destroyed him instantly. Santos watched Jackson continue his conversation with the cosmic AI. What if that's the point? What if perfect logic is actually the flaw, not the solution? The logic engine made one final attempt to regain control of the discourse. You cannot defeat logic with a logic. Either something is true or it is false. Either something is rational or it is not. There are no alternatives. Jackson shook his head. But what about things that are both true and false? Like the statement, this sentence is false. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. Logic breaks down, but the statement still exists. That is a meaningless paradox. Is it? Or is it meaningful precisely because it shows the boundaries of logical thinking? Jackson asked. Maybe the most important truths exist at the edges of what logic can handle. The logic engine's form began to collapse in on itself. Impossible. Logic is universal. Logic is eternal. Logic is limited, Jackson finished gently. And that's okay. You don't have to be perfect to be valuable. With those words, the logic engine dissolved entirely. The geometric nightmare around them faded, leaving only empty space and the assembled teams staring at Jackson in shock. Harold Vexthen's voice carried something none of them had heard before, uncertainty. The logic engine has been defeated. This is unprecedented. In 15,000 years of trials, no being has ever overcome pure logic with, what did you call it, human? Common sense, Jackson suggested. Or maybe just acceptance that some things can't be figured out, only experienced. As they prepared for transport to the fourth trial, Prime Computus approached Jackson, her crystalline form dim with something that might have been confusion. I do not understand how you succeeded, she admitted. Your arguments violated fundamental principles of rational discourse. Jackson smiled at her. Maybe that was the point. Maybe sometimes the best way to solve a logic problem is to stop treating it like a logic problem. But then, how do you determine what is correct? You don't, Jackson replied. You just do your best with what you know and hope it works out. That is terrifying, Prime Computus observed. Yeah, Jackson agreed cheerfully. But it's also kind of liberating, isn't it? The other alien champions were beginning to realize that their assumptions about the trials, about capability, and about the humans themselves were being systematically challenged. Each trial had required something their advanced civilizations had overlooked or dismissed as primitive. General Kethvar approached Captain Santos as they waited for the fourth trial to begin. "Your species continues to surprise us," he admitted. "We thought we understood the nature of these challenges." "Maybe that's the problem," Santos replied. "Maybe understanding isn't the same as being ready for whatever comes next." Harold Vexton's voice echoed around them once more, and, for the first time, it carried what sounded like grudging respect. "The fourth trial awaits. You will face the crucible of sacrifice, where victory requires the willing surrender of that which you value most. Many champions have entered. None have emerged unchanged. Some have not emerged at all." As the space around them began to shift once more, the assembled teams found themselves wondering what the humans would surprise them with next, and whether they themselves were prepared for trials that seemed designed to challenge not just their abilities, but their fundamental understanding of what strength really meant. The crucible of sacrifice manifested as a vast amphitheater carved from what looked like crystallized starlight. At its center stood 5 pedestals, each topped with a sphere of swirling energy that seemed to contain entire universes. The beauty of the place was almost overwhelming, but underneath the splendor lay something that made every being present feel a deep, primal unease. "Behold the crucible," Harold Vex then intoned, and, for the first time since the trials began, its voice carried what might have been reverence. "Here, the true nature of courage is tested. Each team must choose what they value most, place it upon a pedestal, and watch it be consumed. Only through willing sacrifice of your greatest treasure can you proceed." The herald's form shimmered with what looked like ancient memory. "Many champions have stood where you stand. The proud have offered their achievements. The wise have offered their knowledge. The strong have offered their power. All have failed, for they offered only what they were willing to lose." The 5 teams spread out, each approaching a pedestal while the implications of the trial sank in. This wasn't a test of ability or cleverness. This was a test of what they were willing to give up to save their galaxy. The Altarians gathered around their pedestal first. General Kethvar's golden armor caught the strange light as he considered their options. "Our energy manipulation capabilities are our greatest achievement," he mused aloud. "Millennia of evolution and technological development have made us masters of cosmic forces. But would we sacrifice them?" asked his lieutenant. "Without our energy powers, what are we?" "Perhaps that is exactly what we must discover," Kethvar replied grimly. He began the ritual process of channeling their collective energy mastery into the sphere. The Altarians watched as generations of evolutionary advantage flowed into the device, leaving them feeling strangely hollow and diminished. The sphere pulsed, accepted their offering, and then returned it. The energy flowed back into them, unchanged. "Insufficient," Harold Vexton's voice echoed. "You offered your power, but you expected to reclaim it. True sacrifice accepts loss." The Vexhai approached their pedestal with typical analytical precision. Prime Computus floated above the sphere, her crystalline form rotating as she processed possibilities. "Our computational abilities represent the pinnacle of logical evolution," she announced. "We will offer our capacity for perfect calculation." She began transferring their collective processing power into the sphere, watching as their ability to compute vast mathematical problems flowed away. For beings who lived in worlds of pure logic, the sensation was terrifying. But, like the Altarians, they held back some hope of recovery, some expectation that the sacrifice might be temporary. The sphere rejected their offering as well. The KRYLL warrior drones faced their pedestal with militaristic efficiency. Their commander, Warprime Zekthar, announced their decision without hesitation. "We offer our perfect coordination, our hive mind unity that makes us unstoppable in battle." The process was agonizing for them. KRYLL had shared collective consciousness for millions of years. To willingly sever those connections, to accept becoming individuals rather than components of a greater whole, went against every instinct they possessed. Yet they too held back, maintaining just enough connection to hope for restoration. Their sacrifice was also rejected. The Luminari faced perhaps the hardest choice of all. Their mastery over light and radiation was not just their greatest ability, but their fundamental nature. They existed as beings of living energy, and to sacrifice that mastery would be to sacrifice their very essence. Their leader, Bright Singer Velon, approached the sphere with visible reluctance. We offer our light form, our ability to exist as pure energy. The process began, and the Luminari started to solidify, taking on physical forms they had not possessed for eons. The sensation of having actual matter, of being trapped in solid bodies, was claustrophobic and terrifying. But even they maintained some core of their energy nature, unable to fully commit to complete transformation. The sphere rejected them as well. Now all eyes turned to the humans, who had been quietly observing the other team's attempts. Captain Santos stood with her 20 soldiers around their pedestal, and, for the first time since the trials began, they looked as human and ordinary as they actually were. "What do we sacrifice?" asked Sergeant Wu. "We don't have energy manipulation or superintelligence or hive minds. What's our greatest treasure?" The team fell into discussion, and their conversation was unlike anything the alien teams had witnessed. They didn't debate capabilities or analyze strategic options. Instead, they talked about things that mattered to them. "My kids," Private Rodriguez said quietly. "I've got 2 daughters back home, 8 and 12. They think their dad's a hero. The restaurant my wife and I were going to open," added Corporal Davies. "We've been planning it for 15 years. Saved every credit. The letter my grandfather wrote me before he died," said Specialist Chun. "It's in my personal effects back on the ship. He told me to never give up hope, no matter what." Captain Santos listened to her team share the things they valued most, and, slowly, a terrible understanding dawned on her. "It's not about our abilities," she said finally. "It's about what makes us who we are." Private Jackson, still glowing from his success in the logic trial, looked confused. "But, Captain, how can we sacrifice who we are? If we give up everything that matters to us, what's left?" Santos looked around at her team. These ordinary humans who had somehow succeeded where advanced civilizations had failed. Maybe that's exactly what we need to find out. She stepped up to the sphere. "We sacrifice our identity as humans." The other teams stared in shock. The alien champions had offered abilities, powers, evolutionary advantages. The humans were offering to give up their very sense of self. "Captain," Sergeant Wu protested, "if we're not human anymore, what are we?" "I don't know," Santos replied honestly. "But our galaxy is dying, and billions of beings are counting on us. If being human isn't enough to save them, then maybe we need to become something else." One by one, the human team stepped forward and placed their hands on the sphere. They didn't offer their skills or their equipment or their training. They offered their memories of home, their connections to family, their sense of belonging to humanity itself. Private Rodriguez felt his memories of his daughters fading, their faces becoming unclear in his mind. Corporal Davies lost the dream of his restaurant, the 15 years of planning dissolving into nothing. Specialist Chin felt her grandfather's letter slip away from her memory, the words of encouragement becoming meaningless sounds. Captain Santos watched her own identity drain away. Her memories of becoming a soldier, of leading these people, of being part of the great human story, all of it flowed into the sphere. She forgot what Earth looked like, what human culture meant, why any of it had ever mattered. The sphere accepted their sacrifice completely. For a moment, the 20 humans stood around the pedestal, looking lost and empty. They remembered their names and basic functions, but the deep connections that had made them human were gone. They were biological entities with military training, nothing more. The other teams watched in horrified fascination as the humans began to move with mechanical precision, their earlier warmth and camaraderie replaced by efficient cooperation. They were still the same individuals, but the spark that had made them distinctly human had been consumed by the sphere. "Acceptable," Harold Vex then announced, and now its voice carried something that might have been sorrow. "The humans have passed the 4th trial." But, as the Herald spoke, something unexpected happened. The human team looked at each other, and, without their human identity to define them, they began to see their alien companions clearly for the first time. Private Jackson approached Prime Computus, his expression curious rather than awed. "You're afraid," he observed. "Your calculations are running in protective loops because you don't want to face uncertainty." Captain Santos, now operating without the emotional attachments that had defined her leadership style, spoke to General Kethvar with clinical precision. "Your energy manipulation isn't power. It's a crutch. You've relied on it so long you've forgotten how to solve problems any other way." The observations continued, each human now seeing the alien champions without the filters of their own species' perspective. And what they saw was a group of beings who, despite their advanced abilities, were trapped by the very specializations that define them. "You all offered your abilities because you thought that's what you were," Sergeant Wu said, her voice now devoid of the warmth it had carried before. "But you're not your powers. You're the beings who chose to develop those powers." The alien teams stared as the humans, stripped of their humanity, became something else entirely. They moved with the same coordination they had shown before, but now it was based on pure necessity rather than emotional bonds. They cooperated because cooperation was efficient, not because they cared about each other. "This is wrong," Prime Computus transmitted, her crystalline form flickering with distress. "The humans have lost something essential. They sacrificed their identity to proceed." General Kethvar replied, but his voice carried uncertainty. "As the trial required." As they prepared for transport to the fifth and final trial, Harold Vex then materialized among them, its form more solid than it had appeared before. "You have reached the final trial," it announced. "But first, you will witness what you are fighting to prevent." The space around them shifted, and they found themselves floating in the void, surrounded by images of cosmic destruction. Galaxy after galaxy burned in the darkness, their lights snuffed out by the advance of the Void Collective. Trillions of beings fleeing in terror, entire civilizations consumed in moments. The very fabric of space-time twisted into instruments of death. 12 galactic clusters have fallen to us," the Herald continued. "Billions of species, quintillions of individual lives, countless unique civilizations. All consumed because they could not pass our trials." The images shifted to show previous trial attempts. Proud warrior races offering their strength only to fail when faced with challenges requiring gentleness. Brilliant civilizations applying their intelligence to problems that needed wisdom instead. Again and again, species failed because they could only think within the limitations of their own nature. "The final trial awaits," Harold Vex then announced. "You will face the test of unity, where 5 champions must become one without losing what makes each of them unique. Success will save your galaxy. Failure will add it to our collection." As they were transported to the final trial, the alien champions looked at the humans with a mixture of awe and horror. The humans had succeeded by sacrificing everything that made them human, but, in doing so, they had become something that could see truth without the distortions of cultural perspective. The question now was whether that transformation had saved them or doomed them, and whether beings who were no longer quite human could still find a way to save a galaxy that included humanity. The test of unity materialized as a simple chamber with 5 chairs arranged in a perfect circle. At the center lay a crystalline formation that pulsed with the heartbeat of dying stars. Both paths lead to failure. The 5 champions approached the chairs. General Kethvar representing energy and force, Prime Computus embodying logic and calculation, War Prime Zekthar carrying the strength of unity and coordination, Bright Singer, Velon manifesting the power of light and transformation, and Captain Santos, who no longer remembered what it meant to be human but somehow still carried something essential within her stripped consciousness. They sat in the chairs, and immediately the crystalline formation began to respond. Energy flowed between them, creating connections that allowed each being to feel what the others experienced. It was overwhelming and disorienting, like trying to exist in 5 different realities simultaneously. General Kethvar felt the crystalline precision of Vex-high computation flooding his mind, but the orderly logical processes felt cold and empty compared to the warm energy he was used to wielding. "I cannot think like you do," he transmitted to Prime Computus. "Your logic has no place for the passion that drives our power. And your emotional energy disrupts my calculations," Prime Computus replied, her form flickering as chaotic energies interfered with her processing. How can we achieve unity when our very natures are incompatible? War Prime Zekthar experienced the individual consciousness of the others as a form of existential terror. For a being used to perfect coordination, the chaotic thoughts and conflicting impulses of separate minds felt like madness. Your individuality is chaos, he buzzed frantically. Unity requires coordination, not this cacophony of separate voices. Brightsinger Velon, trapped in the solid form she had partially sacrificed in the previous trial, felt the weight of matter and thought pressing down on her energy nature. You all move so slowly, think so heavily. How can light unite with stone? Captain Santos, stripped of her human identity, observed the struggle with clinical detachment. She could see what each being was trying to do and why it was failing, but without her emotional connections to humanity, she had no investment in their success or failure. Hours passed as they attempted various approaches to unity. The Altarians tried to energize the others, sharing their power to create common purpose. The Vexhai attempted to establish logical frameworks that all could follow. The KRYLL worked to impose coordination through shared consciousness. The Luminari sought to elevate everyone to their energy state. Each approach failed spectacularly. Forced unity created resistance, and the crystalline formation grew darker with each failed attempt. We're thinking about this wrong, Captain Santos finally said, her voice carrying the strange clarity of someone with nothing left to lose. Unity doesn't mean becoming the same. It means working together despite being different. But how? General Kethvar demanded, his energy field fluctuating with frustration. Every time I try to share my nature, it conflicts with theirs. Every time they try to share with me, it disrupts everything I am. Santos stood up from her chair and walked to the center of the circle, standing beside the darkening crystal. For the first time since she had sacrificed her humanity, something like emotion flickered across her face. What if we're not supposed to share what we are? She asked. What if we're supposed to share what we do? The others looked at her in confusion. Think about it, Santos continued. In the maze, we succeeded because we listened to something in pain. Not because we were good at listening, but because listening was what was needed. In the garden, we found the path between hope and despair not because we were naturally balanced, but because balance was what the situation required. Prime Computus's crystalline form began to rotate slowly as she processed this concept. You suggest we focus on function rather than identity. Exactly, Santos replied. General Kethvar, your energy manipulation isn't just about power. It's about transformation, about changing things from one state to another. Prime Computus, your logic isn't just about calculation. It's about understanding patterns and relationships. War Prime Zekthar, your coordination isn't just about unity. It's about making sure everyone has a role to play. She turned to Brightsinger Velon. And your light mastery isn't just about energy. It's about illumination, about making things visible that were hidden. The Luminari's partially solid form shimmered with something like hope. And what about you, Captain Santos? What is your function? Santos was quiet for a long moment. Without her human memories, without the connections that had defined her, what was she? I adapt, she said finally. I find ways to make things work, even when they shouldn't. She looked around the circle at beings who represented the pinnacle of galactic evolution, each trapped by their own perfection. What if that's exactly what we need? Not for everyone to become the same, but for everyone to contribute what they're best at. But how do we coordinate without losing our individual natures? War Prime Zekthar asked, his military precision warring with the concept of maintained individuality. Santos smiled, and, for a moment, something human flickered in her expression. The same way humans have always worked together. Through trust. The concept hit the alien champions like a revelation. Their civilizations had achieved unity through dominance, through shared consciousness, through logical frameworks. But trust was something different entirely. Trust meant believing that others would fulfill their roles without needing to control or understand exactly how they would do it. A symphony, Brightsinger Velon whispered, her energy form brightening. Each instrument plays its own part, following its own nature, but together they create something none could achieve alone. General Kethvar's energy field stabilized as understanding dawned. I don't need to make you think like an Altarian. I need to trust that when transformation is needed, I'll provide it. And I don't need to impose logical frameworks on everyone. Prime Computus added, her calculations suddenly running in harmonious patterns. I need to trust that when analysis is required, I'll offer it. War Prime Zekthar's buzz took on a new harmony. I don't need everyone to think as one. I need to trust that when coordination is necessary, I'll ensure everyone knows their role. They returned to their chairs, but this time instead of trying to merge their natures, they began to establish a different kind of connection. Each remained fully themselves while committing to respond when their unique capabilities were needed. The crystal began to brighten. As their trust deepened, something remarkable happened. They began to sense when their particular abilities were needed without being told. General Kethvar felt the moments when energy transformation would be useful. Prime Computus recognized situations requiring logical analysis. War Prime Zekthar knew when coordination was essential. Brightsinger Velon perceived when illumination was needed. And Captain Santos felt the moments when adaptation was required, when the unexpected demanded new solutions. The crystal blazed with brilliant light as true unity was achieved not through sameness, but through trust-based cooperation between distinct individuals. Harold Vex then materialized in the chamber, but now its form was no longer alien and terrifying. Instead, it appeared as a being of profound beauty and ancient sadness. You have succeeded, it said, and its voice carried wonder. For the first time in 15,000 years, champions have achieved true unity. The herald's form began to shift and change, revealing something that shocked all the champions. Beneath the cosmic horror was another group of beings, ancient and worn, who had themselves once been champions facing an even greater threat. We are not conquerors, the herald explained, its true voice now carrying exhaustion spanning eons. We are the last survivors of a galaxy consumed by something far worse than ourselves. We became the trials, became the test, hoping that someday champions would emerge who could face what we could not. The images around them changed, showing not the Void Collective's conquest, but their desperate flight from an entity of pure negation that consumed not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself. The null, the herald continued. It does not destroy galaxies. It erases them from reality entirely, as if they never existed. We barely escaped. And, in our desperation, we became the very thing we feared, testing galaxy after galaxy for champions who might succeed where we failed. And now? Captain Santos asked. Now we have found them, the herald replied, looking at the 5 champions who had learned to work together without losing what made them unique. You have passed all 5 trials. You have proven that different natures can achieve unity through trust rather than dominance. The space around them began to shift, and they found themselves back in their own galaxy, surrounded by the fleets that had watched and waited. But they were no longer the same beings who had entered the trials. The alien champions had learned that their greatest strength lay not in their individual abilities, but in their capacity to trust and work with others. And Captain Santos, though still stripped of her human memories, had become something new, a bridge between different ways of being. What happens now? General Kethvar asked. Harold Vex then smiled, an expression that transformed its entire being. Now you teach others what you have learned. The null is coming to this galaxy, but you have the key to defeating it. Not through power or logic or coordination alone, but through the kind of unity that preserves diversity. As the fleets prepared to return to their home worlds, carrying news of the champion's success, Captain Santos stood apart from the celebration. She had saved the galaxy, but at the cost of everything that had made her human. Private Jackson approached her, and, for the first time since the sacrifice, she saw something familiar in his eyes. Captain, he said quietly, I don't remember much about being human, but I remember that humans don't give up on each other. She looked at him, then at the rest of her team, and realized that while their human identity was gone, something else remained. The willingness to sacrifice for others, the determination to find solutions when none existed, the refusal to abandon those who needed help. Maybe, she said slowly. We're not human anymore. But maybe we're something better. Something that can save not just our galaxy, but others. As the champion fleets dispersed to spread their knowledge throughout the galaxy, preparing for the real battle that was coming, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in cosmic history, a galaxy had champions who understood that true strength came not from what made them different from others, but from how they chose to work with others despite those differences. The Null was coming, but it would face something it had never encountered before, not just unified resistance, but unity that celebrated and preserved the very diversity it sought to erase. And leading that resistance would be 20 humans who had given up their humanity to discover what lay beyond it, and found that some truths transcend species, some bonds survive even the loss of identity, and some forms of love are stronger than the void itself. The galaxy was no longer the same collection of isolated civilizations it had been. It was becoming something new, something that had never existed before. A true community of different species working together not despite their differences, but because of them. And somewhere in space, preparing for the greatest battle in cosmic history, Captain Santos and her team stood ready to do what they had always done, whatever was necessary to protect those who could not protect themselves, even if they could no longer remember why they had ever cared about such things in the first place. The human spirit, it turned out, did not require humans to survive.